Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the Grow Your Own Food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Tim Diebel to talk about his experience with his path from pastor to farmer. Tim grew up in West Texas, the younger son of a local church pastor and his Christian educator wife. After graduating from Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, with a BFA in speech communications, he went on to seminary, graduating with a Master of Divinity degree. After graduating, he served churches in Texas communities in Houston, Athens, and Lufkin. And then he moved to a historic urban congregation adjacent to Drake University in Iowa. During the course of that 19-year ministry, Tim became captivated by the questions of food, our global food system, and the need for a strengthened circle of memory around how to grow food on simpler terms. So at the age of 55, he quit his job, and with his wife, he moved to a 10-acre farmstead they've named Taproot Garden, located south of Des Moines, where they cultivate a large garden and raise laying hens, an enterprise he refers to as a writing project with an outdoor classroom. Welcome to the show today, Tim.
It is a thrill to get to be with you today. Thanks.
Well, thank you. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Well, as you've discerned, I've pretty much been a city boy all my life, and then something kind of weird happened. Well, a couple of things converged several years ago, and one of those was sort of an aborted vacation. We'd made plans, taken time off from work, made reservations, and then Lori's dad had a heart attack. My wife's father had a heart attack, and surgery was scheduled. We canceled our plans, made ready to gather with the family in Minneapolis where the surgery was going to be. And then some ancillary health problems occurred with him, and the surgery got postponed for a couple of weeks. And so, there we were, time on our hands, nowhere to go. And so we, in desperation, conceived of a kind of clandestine staycation and camped out in the lower level of our townhome so that no one would know that we were home. And we just started catching up on books that had stacked up. And at the top of my pile was Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle. And I started making my way through that and just got engrossed. And by the time it was over, read through the resource information at the back of the book, tracked down a nearby CSA and went out for a visit. Wow. And the farmer and his wife were pretty unusual in that world, and over a relationship that extended for several years began to teach us a lot about food on different terms and the importance of pure food. And I think something just kind of took root in us. And
pun intended.
And then converging with that was this sort of larger reality about the life that my wife and I led at the time. She was an educational administrator in a suburban school district and had a really crammed schedule, and my work as a local church pastor kind of had the same sort of hours. They were very different pursuits in some ways, but we would both leave very early in the morning and usually get back at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And on those rare occasions when we did overlap at home, we really didn't want to go out. And so we started hit upon cooking as a date night activity.
Oh, yes, I know that one.
And, you know, one thing led to another. The more we learned about cooking, the more we began to be curious about the food we were using, and that led to a curiosity about where food comes from. And we're both academically minded, and just started doing a lot of research. And the more I learned about the food system that sustains us, the more I learned how energy intensive that system is. You know, how predicated the entire system is on plentifully available and cheap energy. And it occurred to me that one or both of those, one of these days, was no longer going to be the case. And what would happen then, I wondered. And the only answer I could come up with was that I was going to get hungry.
Right, exactly. Exactly. A little known fact that's it's actually more widely known now is that in urban areas really in the world, there's a 3-day food supply. That's it.
Wow.
That's a problem.
Well, and so I really felt like somebody better be remembering how to grow food on different terms.
Yeah.
And something just sort of hatched in my inner world about needing to be a part of that circle of memory. And the problem was I didn't know anything about it, and I'd never done it before. And so I didn't have anything to remember. I only had something to learn. And so one thing led to another, and before long I quit my job and we moved out to an acreage outside of town so that I could learn how to grow food.
Yeah. I really like the words you used. In the bio, it says strengthened circle of memory around how to grow food. Say more about why you choose those particular words.
There are people, thankfully, who know how to do that on sort of old-fashioned, simple terms. You know, the more current words would be sustainably or regeneratively or organically and the like. But really, it is the way our great-grandparents raised food with the resources at hand and fed their families and generations that way. And so there is that circle of memory. But I look around and, you know, I have 2 adult kids. They don't do this. I have lots of friends. None of them do this. And so it seems to me in some ways a fragile circle of memory that I wanted to strengthen with any kind of practice and knowledge and skill that I could gain and add to it.
Nice. Your phraseology behind that it's powerful. It's powerful. So at the age of 55, you quit your job of decades and moved to a 10-acre, you call it a farmstead. And I love that you named it. Tell us the name of your farmstead.
It's called Taproot Garden. And I don't really know where that came from other than the atmosphere, but we were here actually. And more what it felt to me like we were doing was driving down some kind of anchoring route. And as I began to read about taproots, carrots, and the like, what I learned is, you know, it drives down this centering, anchoring, deep route from which and off of which everything else grows. And I just felt like what we were doing out here was trying to gain some kind of fresh and deep grounding for direction and nourishment and the like.
Got it. So pastor to farmer. That's an evolution per se. So did you see it changing different careers, or was it an evolution for you?
No, initially it felt like a major change. It really felt like a 90-degree turn. I found myself sort of feeling guilty at work because the only thing I thought about was this whole food business, and that's not really what I was getting paid to do.
Right.
And so it really required, it seemed to me, to have integrity, but also to just spend full time doing what I was needing to do. It felt like I needed to get away from this one thing and shift gears to another. We're now 5 years into this, and I don't look at it nearly as dramatic as I did in those early days.
Yeah.
It feels significantly more like an incremental evolution rather than a radical shift.
Got it. And it feels to me in our conversation that it was one that was fairly logical and easy for you.
Well, it was terrifying because, again, first of all, I'd never done anything like it before. And so in that sense, it wasn't easy. I remember the first time I determined to jump off the high diving board, I climbed up and immediately climbed back down because I couldn't bear the thought of jumping down. But so it had that feel about it, frankly. But my wife was going to continue to work and did until 2 years ago. She retired as well. And so there was a safety net, if you will. And we had been working to rearrange our life in many ways financially so that we didn't have debt other than housing. And we were at a place where it was risky, but it wasn't terribly risky.
Right.
So it worked. We made the shift, and I stayed home, and Lori went to work, and now that's even better because she's really here full time, joining me in the undertaking. Isn't
that wonderful?
Yeah, very much.
I absolutely love that. That my partner's here, not full time with me, but she's a yoga teacher, and so she's here every day, and we cook dinner every night together. So I'm on board with you on that. It's beautiful.
There's come to be something magical about mid-afternoon thinking, what are we going to have for dinner? And just going to the freezer or to the cabinet or whatever, and it's almost all there.
Yeah. Well, and Kari Spencer, one of my business partner, and she teaches our Growing Food the Basics course at Urban Farm U with me. We have an entire week on basically getting prepared for what happens when the crop arrives. So it sounds to me like, all of a sudden you have 200 pounds of tomatoes. What kind of structures do you have in place for when the crop arrives?
Yeah, and that was acute this summer because we've been shockingly successful the last couple of years in the greenhouse seeding tomatoes and peppers and so forth. We made a major shift a couple of years ago learning about soil blocking. You familiar with soil blocking?
No, tell me.
Well, I had been from the beginning of this enterprise just, with those little plastic seed cell trays that I grew to despise, filling them with potting soil and then sticking a seed in there and stuff. And we had about a 50% germination rate, or at best maybe, and it was terrible. And began reading in different places about this process. I think Elliot Coleman developed it, of using a tool to create a little block of potting soil that you actually put the seed in. And it's kind of a self-contained little matrix that you then put the whole thing in you transplant that whole thing in the garden. Well, we bought the tool, we started making those, and we went from about a 45 to 50% germination rate to about a 95% germination rate.
Wow.
And the problem with that is we'd sort of gotten into the habit of assuming that only half of the stuff we sowed in the greenhouse was going to materialize. And so this spring, for example, the tomatoes, which had by that time become children, right?
Oh, yeah.
That I couldn't bear to throw away, ended up mostly in the garden, namely 175 tomato plants.
Oh.
Because, there's room for one more over here. And so for the better part of August, it was about 50 pounds of tomatoes a day that we were bringing in that needed a home. And when we moved out here, some friends gifted us with a food dehydrator.
Nice.
And so we started using that, and that got overwhelmed very quickly. So then we subsequently purchased a second one of those. And so both of those were firing on all cylinders nonstop. And we can a lot of things and freeze a lot of things and develop strategies for, we discovered that a great strategy for using tomatoes is to do things like tomato sauce and paste, because you start out with a truckload of tomatoes and wind up with a tablespoon of product.
Exactly.
So you can make good use of them that way.
Right.
So we have a number of freezers. We have a number of shelves full of canned goods. We have, those kind of typical strategies for securing the harvest. And this year, I can't say we emptied the freezer by the time we were ready to put the new crop in, but we did a very good job of making our way through.
Fantastic. Have you ever done anything in the realm of CSA or sharing with other people in harvest? Tell me about that.
Well, we have not done a CSA, although we share plenty. We sell eggs. We have 30 laying hens,
nice.
and so that's our economic enterprise. But mostly that's just an effort to try to offset the cost of the feed.
Yeah.
But we were pretty clear when we moved out here, and have intensified the clarity since then, that we didn't move out here really to start a business. We really moved out here to learn how to do this and to find ways to communicate. And so our primary sharing, if you will, is the experience, the place, and some insights along the way.
Yeah.
My ultimate ambition really is to write about this in some book form. And so I have from the beginning kind of described this as a writing project with an outdoor classroom. And so I try to plug away with that. And to the extent that we're able, we share some food as well. But our main intent at sharing is not as a business or as a charity, but really as a knowledge base and experience base, really.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we do, for example, is in conjunction with a local counseling center here in town that works with not only a wide range of individuals, but congregations and clergy, is we have a clergy renewal program that meets once a month through the year. And people who register sign up for a year, and they come out from 8 to 4, one day a month. And part of that day is getting hands dirty in the garden and in the chicken yard.
Nice.
And part of that day, a couple hours, is spent in personal retreat time, walking trails, sitting on benches, journaling, doing whatever. And part of the day is spent in facilitated group conversation around a reading program that we do. So, for example, currently we're reading into the book The Third Plate by Chef Dan, I'm just blanking right now, at Stone Barns in New York, Blue Hill at Stone Barns. Dan Barber is his name.
Oh, Dan Barber, yes, of course.
And so it's really quite fascinating to use that book as a lens, and the work of the morning in the garden, to then talk about what are the insights and the analogs that brings to religious life, congregational life, et cetera. And so we have viewed that to be a kind of a really amazingly transformative process of connecting agriculture, nature, and those folks in full-time ministry in a creative way. So,
you know what I love about what you just said? You are literally going out and planting the seeds for other people to
we hope so.
Do this. Yeah. Wow. And as you can imagine, that's my mission in life too, is how can we get these seeds planted so that everybody knows how to do it?
We had a great experience just a few weeks ago. A group of about 10 kids. I would say they're third or fifth grade primarily came over to visit, and we were showing them around, and we stopped by the chicken yard. Well, we have a main chicken yard that it's about a quarter of an acre, surrounded by one of those web fence, electric fence kind of things, where we have two main coops in there, and that's the main flock in there. And then we have a separate, smaller confine that is where we call it the annex, but it's where the younger chickens that we get or spend time before they're big enough to join the group. One of them kept getting out. One of these young chickens kept getting out, and we
yes, they will do that.
Yeah, we kept studying and watching and never could figure out how this chicken was getting out, but 5 or 6 times a day was accomplishing it. And so we're telling this group of kids about this problem that we're having, and they're hold on.
They solved it.
Well, they tried. They didn't quite get there, but they were fascinated. They surveyed every inch of the fence. They looked everywhere they could, and they made hypotheses about how it was doing. Well, I turn around. I'm going to walk over toward the garden and show them the garden, and I realize no one's going with me. And so I turn around, and they're all like in bleachers at a football game, just camped out beside this little enclosure watching these chickens because they're bound and determined to watch how that's happening. And I come over and I start to say something, and they all shush me because they're watching very intent and they don't want to bother the chickens. Well, what I find really cool about that is they were absolutely engrossed in the experience of what was happening and problem solving and recognizing the importance of predators and what can happen if this small little chicken keeps making the mistake of getting out. And well, I love that. I mean, that's those kinds of moments. We feel like we're doing something worthwhile being out here.
Yeah, I have found that the young people, there's something about this that when we connect in with them, it's magical.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you figure out how the chicken was getting out?
No, and there is a sad end to that story, not because the chicken got out, but because a hawk got in, and that very chicken, who at that point was where she was supposed to be, fell victim to a chicken hawk. So before we ever figured out what happened, but that prompted us to invest in a monumental net that now goes over the entire enclosure over there. That's a 50-foot by 50-foot net that goes from over the small little coop that they live in all the way draped down the sides of the fence. So hopefully that won't happen again.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's, when we take on chicken children, we have them here at the Urban Farm. We have to make sure that they're safe. And we actually recently lost 10 of ours to a bobcat.
Oh, my.
Right in the middle of Phoenix. So it never happened. So we also invested in a great big net, and now have a much more secure, chicken yard. So for those of you out there listening, even if you do live in the 6th biggest city in the country, in the U.S., which is Phoenix, Arizona, right in the middle of it, you need to protect your hens.
Nature is nature.
Yep, exactly. So I want to walk through your property, and I just arrived in my car, and I got out of my car, and you walk up and greet me, and we're standing there looking at 10 acres. What do you fill 10 acres with? Tell us about it.
So you will drive in from the south, and you'll be looking north, and the house then sits on the, generally speaking, on the south edge of the property. And so moving behind the house to the west of the house, we built a 30-foot in diameter limestone lined labyrinth.
Oh, and nice.
And so it's there for people to walk and as a kind of a landmark setting. And moving on past that, you come eventually to the garden, and the garden is about a quarter of an acre divided into 4 sections. And straight across the yard to the east of that is the chicken yard, and right behind, now to the north of the chicken yard, we built a solar system that is hooked to the grid, but by and large provides all of our electrical needs for the
Nice.
house.
Uh-huh.
It's 26 panels,
Wow.
and it's a ground mounted system, and so that's been a real wonderful addition to the property. Behind all of that then is about 3.5 acres that we've put into, it's in process of being restored as a native prairie grasses and pollinator wildflowers.
Ooh.
That we are doing along with the Department of Natural Resources and the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Oh, nice.
And behind that is about 3 acres of woods.
Uh-huh.
That is generally largely unexplored.
Wow. So it's pretty densely grown.
Yeah, it's a great deer habitat, among other things. But deer, and there are some bobcats back there. We see foxes, we see lots of raccoons and possums and the like. But that's sort of the general overlay of the property. From time to time, there is a gentleman from the nearby town who keeps bees at the north end of our property.
Oh, nice.
So it was one of those wonderful kind of serendipities when we were in this initial process with the prairie planning. We received a seed list from the seed purveyor, and I shared that with the beekeeper and asked if he had anything particular that he thought we ought to augment that with or change. And he made some recommendations. I passed those along to the seed provider, and he happily made those adjustments, and that's what's planted out there. And this is now the 3rd year of that development, and they cautioned us to be patient about that, needing 5 or so years to really mature. And this year really has matured significantly over even last year, and so that continues to really be a fascination as much as anything. And we have trails around that and around the property that are through some trees and so forth, and so it's kind of, there's some really wonderful walking areas through around.
Nice. Any fruit trees yet?
We have about 3 dozen.
Oh, wow.
The first year that we moved out here, my kids gave us 6 fruit trees, and we've added to that some. And then the following year, of those are pear, plum, apricot, and apple. And we've added some cherry. We've added another dozen apples of different varieties. And then just this spring, we added 6 chestnuts, 6 hazelnuts, and 6 pawpaws. And I think that's probably our orchard.
That is a pretty epic orchard. That's going to produce a lot of food for you. So
far, the apricots, the plums, and apples, we inherited a fairly mature apple tree, and so we're doing well so far. This was the first year for apricots, and they were in an abundance. We just last week harvested the plums in abundance, and we're looking forward to the pears and the apples.
Yeah, I've had this realization. I study what I call permaculture.
Yes.
What is called permaculture in the world, and I study it and for like 25 years now. And one of the things that I am continually excited with, pleased with, is the notion that in nature there is no lack. In fact, I tell people the only place that lack lives is between our ears.
Absolutely. And as I've looked back through Albert Howard's Agricultural Testament, his notions of observation about how nature farms, that what you just said could have been, I don't think he says it that way, but it could have been straight out of his observations. Nature never, it's beautiful. Yeah.
So, and it sounds like you're experiencing that in spades with 50 pounds of tomatoes a day.
Yeah, and we have this year we tried an experiment with wheat.
Oh, nice.
We planted some hard red winter wheat last September in 2 of the sections of the garden. And so ultimately it was about 1/8 of an acre of wheat. And I try to do things as simply as possible. And so it came time this June for the harvest. And so I bought a hand scythe and we harvested all this by hand. And now we're learning our way through those ancient practices of threshing and windowing. And that's a trip. But in the meantime, we're learning how to, we bought some whole grain, in addition to that, and a mill. And so we've been, for the last several months, practicing grinding grain into flour and making bread and so forth. And really, again, trying to learn fundamentals about where this stuff comes from.
And how to do it.
And it turns out it doesn't come in a plastic wrapper.
Or from the grocery store, for that matter. So this is a pretty significant change that you've gone through over the past, 5 years? Yeah. What kind of challenges did you bump up against, or hurdles did you bump up against?
Well, the first one was space. We were living in a townhome at the time, and our garden was our deck. And I grew to hate pots pretty quickly because the deck wasn't that big, and before long, the stuff in the pots just took over any space. And
it'll do that.
Interestingly, I mentioned this gentleman who has the CSA that we got acquainted with outside of town, and he introduced me to a way of growing things that I continue to use. He had a major health event about 10 years ago and could no longer get down on the ground and, till and do things like he had. And he was at that point confined to a wheelchair, and he drove about a 3-foot length of rebar into the ground and then sleeved that with a 4-inch diameter piece of PVC pipe and filled it with dirt and planted seeds in the top of those vertical pipes that are now, like I said, about 4 feet off the ground.
Oh, interesting.
And he would just roll along. He has those lining his driveway and other places around his property, and he just rolls along on his wheelchair, and he can water and harvest. There's no weeding, obviously.
Wow.
Well, I was captivated by that, and so we employed a variation of that on our deck. And so we had 20 of those just along the inside of our deck rail, which was an incredibly space-efficient way of doing that. And when we moved out here to the farm, I brought those with me, and we put those on the deck we have now. And that's primarily our herb garden there on the deck.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say it's perfect for that. Now, he does eggplant, he does peppers, he does all kinds of things. And I do a cherry tomato and a pepper out there that way, but mostly that's our herb garden. And it's just phenomenal. As I say, it takes up virtually no space. It's easy to maintain. And in fact, a relative of a friend who lives in Indianapolis was planning a kind of a residential program for pregnant women. And she took that idea because a pregnant woman would have an easier time using that for growing vegetables than being able to bend over and deal with things on the ground and stuff. And so I think it's a really remarkable device. Now, we don't have rebar and that kind of stuff on our deck. Obviously, we just have it zip tied onto the deck rail, and I put a kind of a loose closure on the bottom so that it's not just open on the bottom, but still has room to drain. It's fascinating in the fall when I'm putting those things to bed for the winter to pull out the spent plants, and the root system is impressive. I mean, it's 3 to 4 foot deep down into that PVC pipe.
Wow. Do you happen to have any pictures of that?
Sure.
Because I would love to get a picture from you on that so that we can put it on your podcast page. Sure. Cool.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of it. It's a really wonderful system.
I want to try it.
Yeah.
I want to try it.
So space was a big concern like that.
Right.
And certainly know-how was the other. We didn't know what we were doing, and so we just started. And I guess I would say the third was this really was my idea. This was my passion. I came to feel like it was as powerful of a calling as I had known coming to any congregation to serve in that way. And And so my wife went along with that. She was supportive of that, but it was really my vision. It wasn't hers. And so, that was a challenge, I'll say, for her, probably more so than for me, to kind of belly up to this bar, so to speak, and make this shift. So but that's changed since she's retired and is able to kind of embed herself. Embed herself here and make it much more her own as well as mine, and to be really a part and parcel of all that. So, and I would say, with the knowledge part of that and the experience part of that, 5 years in, on a scale of 0 to 100, we're probably at 2.5, but it's better than we were.
Yeah. Well, and hey, 50 pounds of tomatoes a day, baby.
Something to be said for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sitting here looking at this final question I want to ask you before we shift, and I haven't quite got it framed out yet. But it's really, how does your ministry experience from the past inform your earthworks and your gardening? Have you made a connection there?
So and I haven't completely stepped away from that, because I find myself very part-time helping congregations that are in transition when they're looking for a new minister. They have this kind of hole to fill, and so I'm doing that currently, for example. And so there is a very present interplay between those two that's not just my past and my present. I guess I would say, I think my ministry informs my earthwork with a deep and abiding sense of wonder and awe and reverence. I really do think this is quite holy work. Yeah. There's something elemental about gardening that touches the core of our existence and interconnectedness with all of creation. And I would say the flip of that is that gardening informs my ministry by keeping me grounded in the myriad relationships that have to be fed and nourished and tended, or it all just disintegrates. It reminds me that ministry and congregational life aren't just ideas and programs and beliefs and dogmas and all that kind of stuff. It's a living thing, finally, also capable of fruiting and being consumed by bugs and diseases of one kind or another. And farming connects my sense of ministry with the governing localness of expression, which is sort of another sideline, really. I got interested several years ago in this concept of terroir.
Oh, yes.
French winemaking expression, taste of place. And as you know, food growers are more and more picking up on that idea that something grown here will taste different than that same thing grown there because of all those different factors of microclimate and soil, et cetera. And that's really changed profoundly the way I look at congregations, too. I think churches increasingly behave like Applebee's restaurants, with same menus, the same decor, the same uniformly tasting dishes from coast to coast. There really isn't any, I'm of the mind that there really isn't any such thing, finally, as church. There's only a congregation in this place that will necessarily be and express itself differently from one in that place on the other side of town or another part of the country. And to me, that's profoundly agricultural first.
Yeah, wow.
And so respecting place and unique characteristics of soil and climate, et cetera, in one locale have as much to do with being church, I think, as growing food.
Yeah. Wow. Beautifully said. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Well, failure, mostly what I've done out here so far, it could be considered failure, but I guess I would say intellectual or philosophically, when I first started trying to grow food, I naively assumed that agriculture was circular. I knew there would be lots to learn, but once you get the hang of it, you just keep doing it every year, right? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Well, what I've learned is that, knowledge certainly is cumulative, but really no 2 years are quite the same. Right. And so that first year out here of planting a garden, we experienced a long summer of drought, during which, I thought my hand was permanently going to take the shape of the garden hose that I seemed just constantly holding. And so I was ready the second year with drip tape irrigation, and I got all that laid out just in time for the torrential rains that would intermittently continue all through that summer. And last year the greens exploded while the bugs ate the squash, and this year the bugs ate the greens while the peppers and the tomatoes produced off the charts. And and who knows what next year is going to be. All of which is to say that here's this mental picture I have. I think growing food is less of a circle and more like an extended slinky.
I can completely get that.
That's a little nerve-wracking, but I also think it's pretty energizing and stimulating.
Yeah, wow, cool. So what do you consider your biggest success?
Well, we have a framed picture on our wall of our very first tomato. We consider that a pretty big success. But I think really how I would answer that is, as I mentioned earlier, we love to have children come and visit, and they're drawn to the chickens, of course, but they're also curious about the garden, and especially if their visit, by chance coincides with some chance to pick something like a cherry tomato. They can just pop in their mouth and explore the prairie acres. We have a little club car kind of thing that we can drive around these trails I mentioned, and love to do that. And, the wind's blowing in your hair and you're prowling through the prairie and stuff. And well, after one such visit this spring by two young girls, their mother later told us that on the drive home, the older one, who is a kindergartner, I think, was quiet for a bit and then volunteered, "When I grow up, I'm going to marry a farmer. I don't know what we're going to grow, but I know we're going to have a lot of fun." Wow. And I think that feels like a success to me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That moved me. Wow. Cool. So what drives you?
From this kind of biblical world that I've grown up in, I have always found probably the most compelling and alluring image to be from the Hebrew scriptures, from the 11th chapter of Isaiah. It's often referred to as the peaceable kingdom. It's the wolf shall lie down with the lamb and the leopard down with the kid, and those kinds of images. They'll not hurt or destroy on all my mountain. I have always understood that to be an image, this anticipatory image of the disparate elements of natural life working together instead of contending with each other, which I would probably want to describe as a kind of global permaculture at every level.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I am kind of driven and animated by the prospect of living and working in the gap between the way things are and the way I think they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I like to think that my past work and my present work are sort of both, in their own way, expressions of the magnetism of that vision.
Wow. So I'm all about education, and I have to know, is there one book that has been influential for you in this process in your life?
No, but there's three.
Okay, go. Fantastic.
Well, I mentioned Barbara Kingsolver's book earlier. That was really very, very powerfully transformational for both of us. And along about that same time, we read Michael Pollan's In Defense of Food. Now, I know Omnivore's Dilemma is probably way more famous and way more, epical than In Defense of Food, but somehow something about In Defense of Food really was captivating, particularly at the back end of that, where he begins to outline what he later published in independent form as the food rules. One of those things that he mentions is in his rules is you don't eat anything that lists more than 5 ingredients. Yeah. And then, most of which you can't pronounce.
Exactly.
And that's just, I think, very grounding and very clear. I don't have any trouble figuring out what he's talking about. Right. And so, for example, I was in the store, I was looking for Italian dressing a few years ago, and spontaneously I pick up a jar of Italian dressing. and I hear Michael Pollan whispering in my ear. And so I turned the bottle around, and I looked on the label, and I thought, holy cow, first of all, most of this stuff isn't necessary, and I don't even know what it is. Mm-hmm. But the things that I do recognize, I have at home. I can make this stuff myself.
Right.
And so, I love that book, and I would recommend it. Sort of a weird bridge between my two worlds is a really wonderful book by a scholar named Ellen Davis. And the book is called Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture, and agrarian reading of the Bible. And she really takes a magnifying glass, or maybe I don't know if that's the image or not, but she really tries to reread Scripture with an eye for all of its agricultural insight, metaphor, instruction. I mean, all this, and it's one of those things that I guess I'm embarrassed to say. I mean, I've read this stuff. I have come across agricultural, agrarian images, but I never really thought about how compelling and predominant those images are. And then she turns those as a way of thinking about present agricultural practices and policies and interests and the like. And I just think it's a really superb tool to think faithfully about the land, the earth, how we eat, agriculture from that point of view.
Excellent. Thank you. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, you certainly don't have to give up your job and move to the country. So I would hate for somebody to hear my story and assume that that's a requirement. Anybody perhaps has a deck and they can set up a PVC pipe. And if you don't have that, you probably have some scratch of ground that you could stick a seed in. And I guess lastly, I would say don't be afraid to experiment. I'm on my fourth variety of broccoli because I'm determined to grow a broccoli, and so far I've failed miserably. But I think it's a varietal problem more than anything else. I haven't found the right one for the right spot, etc. And so to me, that's advice. Don't be afraid to experiment.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, Tim. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
I have loved the conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
I have a website that is www.taprootgarden.com. And there's a contact page, and that's probably the easiest way.
Perfect. And if you want to go to urbanfarm.org/Taproot Garden, you'll find the information about the podcast and resources there as well. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast.
Thanks so much.
Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.